Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. That's right, folks. Burning through year 17. I don't feel that old, but things sure have changed in 17 years. My goodness. We have two excellent guests for you today, folks. We'll be talking to Alex Kangoun of Athena Solutions and Ryan Welsh of Qlik, Field CTO for generative AI. And of course, Alex is the CEO of Athena. And we're going to talk about one of the absolute hottest topics in the industry. And to put it all in context, and we're talking about AI, of course, large language models. To put it all in context, just before the show, I thought to myself, years and years ago, I wrote my dissertation in college for my philosophy degree and my English degree on a work of art. It was a play by Edward Albee called The Zoo Story. And there's one line in there that I think really reflects what we're seeing in this industry today. He says, sometimes it is necessary to go a long distance out of the way in order to come back a short distance correctly. I remember reading that when I was like 17. I was like, wow, that's pretty deep. What is that guy talking about? It took years to kind of figure out. But when I think about the evolution of this industry of business intelligence and decision support, analytics, business analytics, that's kind of where I think we are right now because we've spent this last 40 years or so mastering structured data and things like data warehouses, for example, and analytic solutions. Business intelligence sits on top of a data warehouse. OLAP cubes, all these interesting machinations we've come up with to be able to facilitate the ingest, the cleansing, the organizing, and the analysis of data to get better decisions. That's structured data. All of that is for structured data. So, data in relational databases, in tables, for example, very structured view of the world. Well, what we didn't conquer was the unstructured data, and that is typically 80% or more of all the enterprise data in an organization. It's not that we haven't tried over the years. There were tools like SharePoint, for example, was kind of designed to give access. It was just a complicated folder system as far as I was concerned. I've never been a big fan of SharePoint. But I got where they were getting. They were trying to give you access to it. And I remember this thing called knowledge management way back in the day, like 30 plus years ago. We talked about knowledge management. It sounded so exciting and it went nowhere. Basically, it was just very difficult. We didn't have the computational power. We didn't have the algorithms. We didn't have the expertise. We didn't have the cheap storage or the fast processors or all these different things that have come together in the last few years. But guess what? We have them now. We can do these amazing things. And there are technologies like natural language processing. NLP is not new. It's been around for decades, but it's gotten very good in the last few decades, in large part due to these transformer models. And before the show, we were talking about Dr. Craig Schmidhuber, who wrote these papers on the transformers in the 1990s. So, way back when he wrote these papers. And only recently, a few years ago, did we have the computational power to leverage what he was talking about and what he was trying to explain. And now we have it. And so Gen AI comes out. Really, its main debut was last year, but it's not just from last year. It's been around for a number of years as well, probably 6, 7 years. They've been working on these GPT things. But ChatGPT, of course, through Microsoft, has now just dominated conversations. And in fact, we just saw something I predicted. I'm going to pat myself on the back. I remember all this talk of Google ending cookies and cookies are going to go away, third-party cookies are going away. I'm like, I don't know if that's going to happen. I think they're going to think twice about that. And then what happened? Now they're like, oh, well, maybe we're not going to go down that road because there's a $600 billion advertising industry that hinges on that stuff. And the other factor, I think, is that Google is now really concerned by ChatGPT and Microsoft, that alliance. Yes, they have Gemini. Google has Gemini. But man, let me tell you, ChatGPT blew the minds of people and lots of cool things are happening. Well, to bring that all together, just like Edward Albee said, come back a short distance correctly. Here we are today with a new technology. It's called Qlik Answers. It comes from a company called Kindy, and Ryan was working on that a long time ago. So maybe I'll start with you, Ryan Welsh of Qlik. We have come a long way in a short period of time, and all of a sudden, the entire world has changed. And you had mentioned in our webinar a moment ago how there's a huge difference between getting a result set from a Google search and getting the answer that you're looking for. And that's the chasm we've just jumped across, right, Ryan?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we've gone from a world where you type in keywords, get a list of search results, click on the links, sift your way through, maybe find an answer. We've gone from that world to ask a question, get a direct, contextually relevant, trustworthy answer instantly.
Yeah,
It's
that's a
pretty
big
pretty
difference.
profound change. Yeah.
Well, and then if you look at the downside, it's still there's a trust component that is being solved. And I remember when I took a demo of Kindy, gosh, it's got to be 6 or 7 months ago, maybe 8 months ago. And I realized these folks have solved that problem because you cite the sources. So the
Mm.
challenge with large language models is that if you ask it a question and the model has not been trained on enough relevant data for that specific query, then it starts getting a bit wonky and it sort of makes stuff up. But as the go-to-market guy for OpenAI said to me in a tweet one day, remember, that's more of a feature than a bug, right? It's generative AI. It's generative in that it creates new text. But what you folks have done have made sure that you're citing where in the text you got that information and including that in the answer. So it's like you're giving credit where credit is due, right, Ryan?
Exactly, and it does depend on the use case too. So in some instances, these hallucinations, people call them, when systems make stuff up, is a feature, not a bug. So if you're trying to create creative marketing content, it's very helpful if the system can come up with something, unique and creative. But when you're trying to get direct answers to very important business questions, it's not good when a system makes something up.
Right.
And
Right.
so and so when you focus on that very specific use case of helping business users get trustworthy answers to their business questions, you can then start to design systems that overcome kind of the bigger challenges of generative AI.
Yeah. And maybe Alex Kangoun, I'll bring you in from Athena Solutions. You've been in this industry for 20 odd years, so you've seen where we've come from. Would you agree that the leap we have made in the recent past, I should be careful not to use the word quantum because I want to think I'm talking about quantum computing. No, but it is a bit of a quantum leap that we've taken in just the last few years. What do you think, Alex?
Like on the previous event, like Ryan mentioned, put the slide where it's like quick answer is easy, but then it's difficult part.
Right.
I've been through this difficult part. I've been through the for like object OCR scanning, trying to figure out where's the data, gluing multiple vendors together so it will come up with a solution. Talk to technology. So I lived through this round bottom part where it's like difficult life. So I'm excited to see there. And what I have there, not everything in the bottom part, not everything in the old days, not everything was manual. There were like tools where you can plug it in and it will work. Like for example, the document scanning, document classification. So there are like some elements of this of automation were already included, but I don't think it was like ever end-to-end solution.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? Maybe Ryan, I'll throw it back over to you. End to end is really important because when you miss one little chunk, that winds up being where you get most of your problems. So to have that end to end solution, and there's still going to be effort required to set up these systems to curate them, for example. But that point Alex just made about end to end, that's really big deal, right, Ryan?
Yeah, it's very important because there's just significant downstream effects if you get something wrong. And candidly, like when people start going in and trying to build these systems themselves, you may be an expert in a certain area, but then you quickly kind of branch out into areas where you're not an expert, right? So like say you're very good at working with vector databases. Okay, well, are you an expert in chunking strategies for documents? Maybe not. Right. And so you start to get around all these. Are you an expert in prompt engineering as you put stuff into? And so you start to, when you put these systems together, there's so many different areas of expertise. Each one has, downstream effects. You need to be good at a lot of things. So it does become quite complex and you need to kind of have the expertise in that end-to-end system.
Yeah, and let's kind of dive in a little bit to the embeddings, which you're alluding to in vector databases. You
Mhm.
will take your enterprise data and load it into a vector database. And what happens there, if I understand it correctly, is you're converting text into numeric values, vectors to be precise. So a point and a trajectory and a length, basically. And
Yep.
then in that vector database, you have these vectors that represent concepts in the linguistic world, like dogs and cats and cars and things of this nature. So what happens is it's kind of a consensus engine, but it's also something that facilitates similarity searches. So what you're doing is you're populating this vector database with your enterprise data so that your RAG model, as we've talked about, retrieval augmented generation, your RAG model is weighted in favor of your enterprise data. And that's going to greatly increase the accuracy of the answers you get when you send in your prompts, right, Ryan?
Yeah, so when you ask a question, correct. So when you ask a question, what it's first doing is it's vectorizing your question as well. And then it's projecting that question against all of your vectorized data to ultimately find matches between the question that you're asking and the underlying data. It is then pulling back those snippets of text or documents or whatever kind of pieces of information that you ultimately want to bring back. And then when you bring those back, you're pushing them into a large language model and you're saying, large language model, here is the relevant data. Here is my question. Provide a concise answer to my question. And then the system, the large language model, the GPT model, is ultimately reading through it and synthesizing that text that was input into it into a single answer in response to the user question. So it's based on the enterprise data versus based on knowledge that was trained or captured from a training on an open internet.
Right. And that's the key, right? So you're providing the raw meat, if you will, the raw material to the engine to spin up the words that explain something. And in doing so, you're just using the large language model for its text generative abilities, right, Ryan?
Correct. Yeah, you're using it for reading through, understand this information, generate a new and novel answer based on the information that I just provided. But importantly, though, a kind of a second step here, because I don't want to say that just inputting enterprise data into a system will completely eliminate hallucinations. A lot of times these systems, or sometimes rather, they will still hallucinate. And so you need to check answers as they come out of the large GPT model as well to confirm that it actually is only being generated from the underlying data source.
Yeah. And there are lots of different ways you can build these RAG models. So this came out of Facebook, I believe, or Meta, I guess it's called these days. And it was designed for this express purpose to ground your answers in truth, which is what you want to get when you ask these questions. So there are different ways you can do a RAG model, and you can have multiple steps. So on the way back, you can have a governance type layer that double checks things and says, okay, now look back at this and make sure that we did this correctly. That's basically what it is, right? It's almost like a check and balance that you build into your workflow. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And so in that instance, you are using the language model for the generation piece. And so you use the vector database for the information retrieval of relevant content, push that into a GPT model to generate text. Then you can have these other modules just to double check the GPT model's answer
Right.
and confirm that that's only being generated from the underlying text versus some subreddit somewhere out on the internet
Yeah,
about
yeah.
your product.
That's right. I've heard that they were trained on Reddit, so
Yeah, of course.
that can add a couple interesting curveballs. But Alex, I'll throw it back over to you. That curation is an important part, but it's always been an important part. I mean, one of the, I think, misconceptions about this whole new era of large language models is that they have to be 100% correct or there's no value. Well, the old way of doing things was not 100% correct. You have to get to a certain critical mass of accuracy. So ideally like 90, 95%. But curation has always been part, and it will remain a part of this process too going forward, right, Alex?
Absolutely. And let me add more to what you said, Ryan said that uh, you mentioned data hallucination, but there is also a concept of data poisoning and data quality. And it's you according to IBM, you only need to to have access to hundreds of percent. It's like .01 of the data to make sure your model to access to the model, so the model will produce different results. And yes, you need a curation because it will ensure its work the way it's supposed to work. Because if you think about whether we'll use drug discovery or fraud detection based on the bank statement, the results can be significant and it will have significant impact on the overall business outcome. Let's say, people who are not supposed to get account. Drug discovery that maybe good drug will not get. developed.
Yeah, no, that's actually a good point. And maybe got a couple minutes left in this opening segment. Ryan, I'll throw it over to you. It is interesting how the smallest changes in your prompt can have a significant impact on the result set that you get. And I guess that just speaks to the complexity of the models. But can you talk about that for a minute?
I think it speaks to the complexity of the models and both the lack of understanding of these models.
Interesting.
Um, these models are incredibly complex. They make up tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of parameters in some instances. But there is kind of air quotes that you need to put around this word understanding language, right? And so I often say, oh, these systems now understand language, but do they truly understand language? I would say no. And so because they don't understand language, it's these subtle tweaks in the prompt that lead to wildly different outcomes. Where if I
Hmm.
were to ask you a question and just kind of change a word or two, I would probably get a similar answer to my question versus two wildly different answers.
That's a very, very interesting point. And just to explain to our audience, and this is very important to understand, these large language models are predictive engines that reflect back patterns of letters and words based upon their training. So they don't know the truth per se. And that's why you want this embedding strategy. The embeddings are your anchors of truth. As someone, Brian Raymond, actually of Unstructured IO, gave me that quote. I was like, oh, I'm going to steal that, man. That's good. Anchors of truth. Because again, they were trained on voluminous amounts of text and they reflect back patterns of words and they're still just doing the next word or the next letter even, which is almost hard to believe, but I've been told from very smart people on the inside that yes, it is still just generating based upon the next word. It can see now, thanks to the transformers, it can see like 8, 10 tokens left,
Yeah.
8, 10 tokens right. It used to be just like 2 or 3 tokens in the early versions of this. And so it's like being able to drive and see 100 feet in front of you instead of 10 or 20 feet. It's a lot better. You're going to do a better job driving if you can see at least 100 feet. But would it be nice to see 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet? And that's kind of where these things are going. So there is tremendous innovation that's happening every day. In our next segment, we're going to talk about one of my predictions, and I'd like to hear what Ryan and Alex think about all of that. But folks, if you want to be on the show, send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. We're booking out the second half of the year right now. So send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all things AI and large language models and answers. Isn't that what we've always wanted? Answers from our data. And wow, have things changed. So we're talking to Ryan Welsh, Field CTO of Qlik, and Alex Kangoun, CEO of Athena Solutions today. And both of these gentlemen have a lot of experience in this space. Natural language processing, again, not new, but newly attractive and newly innovative, newly changing how we do this whole industry of decision support. And that's really the aha moment for me. And I'll throw this over to Ryan Welsh to comment on. But I view this hurdle that we've just jumped across of being able to use natural language queries on the expanse of our corporate data to get very relevant answers and have their citations for where the answers came from. I think this is frankly a quantum leap, and I think it's really going to change how we interact with data in a much more compelling and positive way. But what do you think, Ryan?
I absolutely agree. And so any time, what's pretty interesting is anytime you teach a machine to understand natural language in a better way, whether it's the syntax of language, the semantics of language, the pragmatics of language, anytime you kind of make pretty significant improvements, which is what we've done with large language models, um, you just completely change the interface with computers. And so the primary way that we interface with each other as people is natural language. We don't do it with pictures and other things. And so now that systems can actually have a better understanding of language, everything we do, I think personally, is going to be in this natural language interface with machines.
Yeah. That's just such a big deal. And Alex Kangoun, I'll throw it over to you. We joke that you've been through all the tribulations and trials of the last, 25 years or so in the data world. And all of a sudden, and one of the best quotes I've heard to describe this is, it used to be that you had to learn how to talk machine, machine language to talk to a machine, like SQL, the structured query language. If you know SQL, you can ask some questions of a database. Now, you don't have to know that anymore. You can just use English words or French or German or whatever and ask questions of your data. That's a huge change. I mean, that's going to increase the usage of this kind of process and this technology. I have to think by 10, 20, 100 fold. What do you think, Alex?
I'm a little bit selfish in this regard. I'm looking to automate things that I don't like to do, like repeatable tasks over and over I have to do. And I mean, in general, it's a validation, data review, looking for the commonality of discovering fraud. So you can train machine to do it better than human. But then human have to be involved anyway to overseeing and validating, looking at the results, dealing with hallucinations, dealing with like validation and like overseeing. So the your part, it's like, okay, if I'll get it, great. But for now, I'm just looking for more time to out of my day to get through all the tasks that repeatable and can be automated and it can be coded.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And throw it over to Ryan. There is this narrative in the media, and I've got an expression I use that the narrative is always wrong because it's a story. It's not the real world, it's a story about the world. And the media tends to buy into hype cycles, get all excited, and then get to the point where they overreact when it goes down. And so it's a little bit disingenuous, especially mainstream consumer media, right? Trade press is a bit different because you have to be more serious and focused. And that's, of course, what we try to do on our shows because we're trade press. We're business media, basically, as opposed to consumer media. But in consumer media, the story is, oh, the red-eyed robots, AI is going to take over the world, all the jobs are going to go away. And, to the point that Alex just made and you made earlier, humans are going to be a part of this conversation forever and should be and need to be for the curation, for the modification, for the redesign. So it's not that that jobs are just going to go away, but it's that jobs are going to change. And what's the old line I heard that it's not so much that AI will take away jobs, it's just that people who don't learn how to use AI will be replaced by people who do. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I totally agree. I will also add to your comment, though, that people in the AI community often don't help the mainstream media understand the limitations of these technologies. And
Right.
so, you have a lot of really smart people out there saying we're a year away from artificial general intelligence. I mean, that is, in my mind, a pretty insane comment. And if true, then all the stuff that they're saying we do need to prepare pretty urgently for
Right.
pretty significant changes in the labor force. I personally think they're way off in their predictions, and we're not even close to artificial general intelligence. But we are making very big leaps along that path towards artificial and general intelligence. And I do think people need to get accustomed to using AI tools to accelerate their productivity. And I agree that people that become really good at using AI in their workflows are going to replace the people that aren't good at using AI within their workflow.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. As I sit here and think about it, and I think you're right, by the way, about these predictions of AI waking up and the singularity as they've talked about
Yeah.
and things of this nature. I don't think that's anytime soon, in part because it's simply not sentient. They look like they're sentient. They carry the appearance of sentience because they can give you this picture perfect prose on complicated questions. It seems to know these things. It doesn't know anything. It just basically has, and it's not even that it has these models have absorbed the text in actual strings of text. It's just that they've modified their weights and balances in the parameters of which there are billions. So in that sense, it is similar to how the human brain works, but that was always the idea with neural networks and with deep learning. It was always we're always trying to approximate how people think about things. But nonetheless, it is just a very fancy machine that looks to be sentient, but certainly isn't. But what I'm thinking to myself is this layer is going to be the new interface through which we engage with our enterprise software for decision
Mm,
making. And so that layer becomes very important. And there are a lot of things you can do inside of that layer. So when we talk about RAG, for example, governance gets baked into RAG, security is baked into
yeah,
RAG, data quality gets baked into RAG. So in
yeah.
that sense, we are seeing this really, what I think is going to be a dramatic shift in the IT landscape and your tech stack and what it does and how all that operates. What do you think about that, Ryan?
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like this system of intelligence that sits between the user interface or and the data repositories that you're ultimately accessing, right? And so, like, if you think about analytics, we would traditionally find the right data, present that data to you in a user interface that's visualizations, right? Because the system couldn't communicate with you, the best medium of communication was a visualization. Well, now if we actually pass that data to, instead of through the visualization, into a large language model and tell it to synthesize the answer to the question, we're basically doing the same thing. And so we're accessing the right information, we're passing it somewhere, either through a visualization, but now to a large language model, and that language model now providing an answer to you in natural language. I think the large majority of us out there would prefer the answer in natural language versus a visualization. So I do think that these natural language interfaces are going to be the primary way that people interact with data. But the key piece is you got to be really good at accessing the right enterprise data. So you got to have the data governance in place. You got to have the business intelligence platform in place, and then with that, you can layer on the natural language interface.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Alex, go ahead.
No, I just want to add to what you're saying that, and it's come from practical example. We use testing words AI for code generation for light software implementation, and it worked well where it's the simple cases. It worked well. When it's complex cases, what we end up providing team list of instruction how to talk to model. So it's like we're replacing one complex language with another. Like, okay, if you want to ask this,
That's
use that,
funny.
and it was like a big success. People like it. So no, like to support your point, we're not ready. We're not there yet. We're trying, but we're not completely there.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an ongoing process as we deploy these technologies and get deeper into it all. We do have a couple good questions from our audience. I'll throw one over to Ryan maybe. One attendee is asking about forms, which is a semi-structured data basically. So you've got
Yeah.
unstructured data like Word documents, you've got structured data in relational databases, and you have the semi-structured data like data in forms. How would Qlik Answers deal with that kind of data?
Yeah, it really depends on the form and ultimately the data ingestion pipeline to turn that form into a relevant vector into a vector database. And so sometimes people say forms and it's quite literally like a structured table. Some people say forms and it's 1/4 of the page is a structured table and the rest is actually like more long form text. And so these vectorization methods do better with long form text versus a structured table on a form that I'm then putting into a text because there's really not a lot of context. And so honestly, it really comes down to what does the form ultimately look like. If it's highly structured form, won't be so great. If it's a less structured form, it'll be fine.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we got a couple other interesting questions here in the audience. We'll get to those before the show is out today. But there is also the side that Ryan mentioned earlier that sometimes people in the Silicon Valley world and the AI world don't do a good enough job explaining to the media what these things do and don't do. And I've seen on LinkedIn all sorts of posts of people giving ChatGPT these very complex math problems or word problems, and then they're like, "Oh, look, it didn't do a good job." I'm thinking that's a misuse of the tool. It is a text generator. It is not a reasoning engine, although I think that we are going to see layers of that built in over time. I think you're going to see emphasis, I'm sure they're working on this right now, of reasoning engines. So problem solving around challenges. I mean, we're seeing some of that with this discussion around AI agents or agentic AI, as some folks describe it. But Ryan, I'll throw that first over to you and then maybe to Alex to comment on. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, so I agree. Reasoning is going to continue to be important. One area that I would really push on, though, is the representation. And so is the representation of a neural network, and specifically a transformer-based architecture, ideal for doing really good reasoning, right? And so people throw around reasoning and forget that there's all types of reasoning. They just say these systems are
Right.
good at reasoning, right? So
Right.
there's abductive, there's deductive, there's analogical, inductive reasoning. And so I think to have a really good reasoning system, you might actually need to create a new architecture that is actually a hybrid symbolic system and a neural architecture, something that a lot of researchers are looking into. They're calling kind of neurosymbolic AI. But
Hmm.
reasoning is going to improve on these large language models. I guess I question if the reasoning can get to a level of folks saying we then get to an AGI.
Yeah, or like thinking outside the box, for
Yeah,
example. I think that's basically what's happening is everything is inside the box these
yeah,
days, and thinking outside the box, that's a very human thing to just step back and go, wait a minute, why are you even talking about this? Let's talk about that. I mean, humans can jump tracks in their mind in no time whatsoever, and these things aren't quite there yet. And you also have inference workflows, right? Inference pipelines. So you pull data in, you analyze it, you infer, and then you take some action. I mean, that can be incredibly complicated, but humans do it all the time. We do it
mm,
just having grown up. I mean, I thought to myself as I was walking the dogs the other day, how I have these two German shepherds, and they're very good at wrapping around me the second I get them both on a leash. And if like I'm trying to hold something, I'm like, there you guys go again. Thinking how you move your hand to get out of that knot, that's a pretty complex
yeah,
problem, but I know how to do it just from years of grasping things and dealing with knots. And of course, the dogs have no idea that if they would just walk back around the tree this way, it would like lengthen the the cord.
yeah,
So it's like, dogs aren't all that good at reasoning either. If you train them, maybe a whole bunch of bits of kibble all around to go back around this way, you'll figure it out. But I'll throw that over to you, Ryan, for some commentary. The complexity of reasoning is vast, and I think the key in the near term is just to really appreciate what these tools do, understand how to use them, and use them accordingly, right, Ryan?
yeah. That's right. So reasoning will improve. Reasoning is very, very difficult. We're not completely there on reasoning yet. We're really great at doing text generation presently. So use
Yeah.
them for text generation tasks. These systems do hallucinate, so check the work, and have fun using it for the things that they're really great at today. I mean, I use these systems every day, at least an hour, 2 hours a day, and I get significantly more done because I use them. And so just because there's not full scaled out reasoning capabilities doesn't mean everyone should be running away. It's just kind of incremental steps that the AI community has been taking for decades. They'll just kind of continue down that path.
Yeah, I think that's right. And when I look at some of the media coverage of these things, like the infamous story of the lawyer who used ChatGPT to come up with the case law that didn't exist, I almost wonder if there's a certain amount of FUD involved here, fear, uncertainty, and
Yeah,
dread, because the powers that be are looking at it going, "Holy Christmas, this is a seriously big deal. We need it." Even Elon Musk said, "Oh, we should take a break on AI." I'm like,
yeah.
dude, come on, man, really? You think anyone's gonna take a break? No one's taking any breaks, Elon. But folks, we'll take a break, and we'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, ladies and gentlemen, back here on DM Radio. What a fantastic show with Alex Kangoun, CEO of Athena Solutions, and Ryan Welsh, Field CTO of Generative AI for Qlik. We're talking all about large language models. We're talking about AI. We're talking about answers, getting answers to your questions. And isn't that what we've always wanted? And we all got used to the search box leading to a whole bunch of possible answers. That's basically what it is. Oh, here's like 10 answers I found. And of course, it gets heavily skewed toward the advertisers. I mean, I think in a way, poor Google is a bit muscle bound by the success of their AdWords program, where now you do any query on Google, you get 25 sponsored links before you get to anything at all that is generic or is organic in terms of results. And I've heard some shade even thrown at the organic side of the organic stuff that you get these days when you go to Google. But that was from an industry insider as well. Interesting stuff, but now we've leapfrogged right over a lot of those problems to where we can have a conversation with our data. Now, there are things like context windows to keep in mind. There's only so much you can push into these systems to ask questions of. But Ryan, maybe I'll throw this one over to you. Is the first demo I saw of Kindy, which is now part of Qlik as Qlik Answers, you could take a user manual for an iPhone, for example, let's say it's a 30, 40-page document, load it into the system, and it automatically gives you a list of frequently asked questions that are suggested and the answers. And then you can kind of curate all those answers, which I thought was fantastic. And then when you ask a question, not only does it give you an answer, but it shows you where it got the information. So you're citing the source, page 3, paragraph 2, page 5, paragraph 7. That is incredibly powerful. I mean, think about legal proceedings and knowing what to do when. Think about very complex instruction sets that you get for maybe building complex systems. The fact that you can load all that into one of these modules and then just ask any kind of question, just as if you had an assistant who knew everything sitting next to you, that is a major game changer, right, Ryan?
Yeah, it is pretty incredible. I mean, I use these systems all the time to synthesize very, very long documents. I mean, they're really good at understanding language, and I will put air quotes around understanding, because I don't
Right.
know if it's
Right.
actually understanding the language, but it's really good at kind of getting the gist of it, synthesizing it, and distilling it down in a natural language way, and providing responses back to you, which is just, pretty profound improvements to our productivity. I used to always say that humans were the bottleneck in the modern production process because we couldn't read or understand information any faster than our parents or grandparents.
Right.
Well, now we have systems that allow us to read and understand information faster
Yeah.
than our parents or grandparents, and so it's pretty significant impact in kind of the output and the productivity of the world.
Well, and Alex, I know that you weren't born in America, but you've been here for a pretty long time. And you may know about Cliff's Notes. Do you know what Cliff's Notes are?
Yes, yes.
They're this.
I have a college degree from US, so yes. The first
So
things you learn in college.
so basically, these new technologies, it's like a Cliff's Notes engine for the summarization for whatever book you want. So you grab War and Peace, load it into the model, say, all right, give me the 3-page version, give me the 5-page version, and bam, it does that. And all of a sudden, you know the characters, you know the plot line, you know some basics about the story. You won't know everything. You can still get a gotcha question from your teacher, but that's kind of what we've done, right? What do you think, Alex?
I think there is a problem. You mentioned it before, that a lot of misconceptions about AI,
Right.
and the industry doesn't help understanding it. You've seen it, I've seen it, and I think it's built on cliff notes without practical understanding, without practical experience. So I don't see cliff notes as a help. I see the problem.
Well, a problem for building real world information systems, that's probably true. For
And the
passing a
people can,
test in English class, probably not so bad.
right, and people can tell, yeah, it just,
You should still read the book, kids, okay? Like
right,
that's the whole point.
yes,
You should
exactly.
still read the book.
Go back,
Don't
yeah.
like if you just know it's like from going from the book to the movie. Does that ever work? Should you ever see a movie after reading the book? I don't think so. What do you think, Ryan?
No, I know you should never see the movie after reading the book. It's always worse than the book,
It
and
is.
you'll be that person saying it's not as good as the book,
Right.
which
That's
is
right.
you don't want to be, you don't want to be that person. But kind of coming back to large language models, I do agree with Alex that it's best to really have a good understanding, and I think this is where people can get in trouble, is if they start to really try to like interrogate areas of knowledge where they don't have a good understanding, and start to use that, and you maybe get something that is contradicted by some other area of that knowledge. But what I found with using it myself is, areas where you have a good understanding and you're just trying to recall certain things and synthesize some stuff and put together different arguments or documents, and so just using it to kind of scale yourself up where you have sufficient knowledge, I find to be very, very helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. So, and what I've found, and which is so interesting, and this does change your workflow of the day. you can ask all kind of questions of these systems and get some really good answers as long as it's widely published about. But you can learn whole new topics in moments, like right before a meeting. You can go and just kind of brush up on, oh, what is this? How does this work? How does that work? For that kind of thing, it's very good. And then back to business use cases. And maybe, Ryan, I'll throw this over to you. You talked about customer service. I think that's really low hanging fruit, customer service. The latest catalog of products that we have, for example. So a customer service person is on the phone, a whole new product catalog has come out. Well, that person isn't going to have had time to go read everything. But if you have this kind of system connected to it, all of a sudden they can, on the call, be using keywords and asking questions and getting answers to talk to that person on the other side of the phone. I think for customer service, this thing is a slam dunk. It's probably going to be, along with just copywriting for marketing folks, probably the lowest hanging fruit and the quickest road to value. What do you think, Ryan?
I totally agree. Customer support's just such an obvious obvious use case. I do think it's probably a little bit of an overcrowded market presently because it's
Mm,
such an obvious use case.
right.
We continue to have success there just because just how phenomenal the product is and how easy it is to use. One area where I actually see really big value outside of customer support is sales enablement.
Mm,
And so, just enabling your sales reps to ask questions of your competitive intelligence, your product marketing. I mean, all of that, particularly in kind of complex enterprise sales where you have maybe a complex data platform that you're trying to sell. And there's a lot of vendors that may be a competitor on like one specific feature of what you have.
interesting.
It's hard to actually keep up with a lot of these things. But if you have a generative AI knowledge assistant that allows you to ask any question and get that answered back directly, it's really a game changer for sales folks.
Yeah, that's a really
I
good
can,
point. Go ahead, Alex.
now I just want to bring one more use case for investment reports. Sometime in investment report, you feed a lot of financial data and you need to produce text describing it like for your investment. And we've seen it like of course, it needs a curation, it needs the validation, but it's summarizing based on the numbers, based on all the information, and provide very good summary that can be presented to potential investors.
Yeah, that's an excellent use case where again, you're using the summarization capacity of these tools to get right down to the bare bones to give someone information to help them understand a particular topic because it's very good at the summarization. It's very good at finding the key pieces within the context. And as we've discussed, one nice thing about Qlik Answers via Kindi is that it cites the sources. So it'll show you where it got that information. So that's the provenance, that's the reliability, that's the trust component that we want. Again, there's still work to be done. You have to you need your embedding strategy. Maybe I'll throw that over for a last question in this segment to Ryan. When you're actually training, or let's say you're either fine tuning a model or you're populating your vector database with your enterprise data, how does that actually happen? How do you load data like enterprise data from, let's say, a data warehouse or something? How do you actually load that into a vector database?
Yes. So well, it's super easy at Qlik because we have all the connectors, so we can access all
Ah,
of that,
good answer.
all of that data, which is I mean, to be honest, I know half a dozen founder CEOs of startups that have kind of started first generation AI companies, probably from 2015 to 2020. Their second AI company is all in ETL because
Wow.
their first AI company was all about accessing the data and trying to transform it. And so, luckily here at Qlik, we have just world-class data integration business, which allows us to connect to any unstructured data source. So then once we connect to that, we're ingesting that data, we're doing the chunking, we're doing the vectorization, we're landing it into a vector database, which you can then continue on and use the user interface of Qlik Answers. Some folks, would maybe go their own direction on something else that they build by themselves, but still we have the capabilities here at Qlik to access that data, vectorize it, and land it in a vector database.
Good stuff, folks. You are listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on DM Radio. We're talking to Ryan Welsh of Qlik, and Alex Kangoun of Athena Solutions. And we got a great question from one of our studio audience members. And folks, if you want to be part of the studio audience for the show, send me an email, info@dmradio.biz, or go to dmradio.biz where you can register for most of these events. We use Zoom to record these shows, so anyone could be part of the studio audience. And Ryan, the question is, some organizations do not support the use of large language models. There's a big policy that says, no, timeout, don't use it. What are some bits of advice you can give to help the poor lads working at these companies to get management to let them use the tech?
Write your local congressman. I'm like kind of joking and meaning,
Using AI.
Yeah, write your manager. I mean, look, we work with the largest organizations in the world. We work with companies that need the highest levels of data security, and all of them have gotten through the hurdles to certify the use of some large language model in the last 12 months. And so if your organization is still kind of that, we're not working with any large language models, then I would actually say that you're probably going to be left behind by the companies that have done it. And so hopefully there's a timeout to get through the certification, the compliance process, so people can be comfortable, and there's something coming down the pipeline. But if there's nothing coming down the pipeline, then submit your resume to Qlik Careers, and we'll take a look.
There you go. Or even just start your own business, folks. I mean,
Yeah,
honestly, the best business models I've come across were started by folks who were in another business where they saw an opportunity, they saw some
totally.
hurdle, they saw some challenge that wasn't being addressed, and they said, there's an opportunity here. So, Alex Kangoun, I'll throw it over to you. Maybe I'll throw this one over to you because you are steeped in the traditional business intelligence, data governance world of analytics and structured data. Now leaning into unstructured, of course, you've had some experience in that realm too. How do you work with your clients to get them to pivot more clearly and focus on this space, realizing that it is a really serious game changer? How do you see that as a bit of a challenge? Are there still mindset issues in the traditional business intelligence world that don't want to go down this road?
Sure. So my view is a little bit different. I feel like if they're asking you a question about the LLM model and bringing new technology within an organization, there are some problems. That needs to be understanding of what the policy procedure. Every company, and we also work with a highly secured federal and government agency, there's process to bringing new technology into place. And rather than write to congressman, you need to work with this organization. You need to work with the policy. You need to understand what the way to get into, and you have to justify it. You have to present use cases. You have to use examples. And also, I agree. If you don't do this, organization will be left behind. It's not like option. Should we do it? Should we not do it? The security is not with LLM model. The security is not with technology. Technology can support different level of security. It's how to position it as an organization so it will work within existing policies. So chief legal officer and chief security officer will feel comfortable with that and will get approval rather than, and a lot, in my experience, yes, you run into issue, but in many cases, they'd like to understand more about it, or they have misconceptions, or they have the education based on the horror story, based on the friends told them. So you need to deal with it. That's my take.
Mhm. Yeah, and final comments from Ryan. I'll just throw this out there. You've said as much on this show. You work with these tools an hour or two every day, and I think that's really a key to success. Is just play around with these things, ask it
Yes.
all sorts of weird questions, and see what comes back. It's a new vehicle that we have to learn how to drive properly, and that requires usage, right?
Yeah, that's actually something that I encourage a lot of enterprises to do when they say, where should we get started with generative AI? So it is important to set the right kind of boundaries for how to play with these systems, right? Don't put confidential enterprise data in there. But if you get these enterprise licenses, and I encourage every enterprise to get these licenses, but enable your people to play around with these systems because they're going to uncover use cases that you've never thought of that's going to drive significant value for your organization. You're going to get the institutional knowledge of how to use these systems, and you just have to play with these systems to get great at them.
Yep. It's good stuff. Well, folks, we've been talking to Alex Kangoun of Athena Solutions and Ryan Welsh of Qlik, the field CTO for generative AI. It's here, folks. It's everywhere. It's amazing. You have to check this stuff out. I promise you, you're going to save yourself time in the day and you're going to boost morale. And I think that's the most important quotient in any organization is morale. No one likes tedious, boring stuff. No one likes having to climb uphill both ways to go to school. Now we can ride the scooter, get to school faster, and have more fun along the way. Send me an email if you want to be on the show, info@dmradio.biz. We've been listening to DM Radio.